So hello and welcome. If you're watching this in the know, we are excited for your interest in this topic, and our topic is teen mental health in schools. It's what adults can do to help teens. And we're talking about adults in our homes and adults in our schools. My name is Kelly Anderson. I'm a parent and I'm also the founder and the CEO of FamilySmart. This topic is especially important to me. My son is 30. But his last year of full school was grade 7. So I know that kids can do well. And sometimes it doesn't look like graduation like everyone else. They can still be successful at life. And he is. He's got a job, a girlfriend, that they're getting married. And I've long forgotten about being stressed about him not doing school like everyone else did. So I really hope you enjoy this discussion we're going to have today. In the Know is brought to you through funding from Here to Help. Here to Help is an initiative of the Provincial Health Services of BC and the BC Ministry of Children and Family Development. And we are thrilled to have two guests with us tonight. So we have Jeremy Church. Jeremy is a principal at Mountainside Secondary School in North Vancouver and also a district principal of social emotional learning and mental health, which we're pretty impressed that there's actually a position like that for a principal. So thank you, Jeremy, for
What
coming.
it all means is still being determined, but yes.
Right.
Yeah. It's good to be here. Yeah.
Right, but it's great that we're actually putting that onto somebody's title now and role and responsibility.
Yeah, for sure.
And our other guest is Colleen Clark, and Colleen is a parent of 2 young adults and also a FamilySmart practice consultant. So thank you for Colleen for also being part of this discussion.
Thank you.
So I want to start, and we're just going to talk about things that parents and young people and teachers and principals have told us are the kinds of things that they want to know more about around schools. There's going to be about 4 assumptions that we're going to talk about in this session. And I want to start with the one that Jeremy brought this up for us, and we thought, yeah, I think that we do make that assumption. And it's around teens don't want their parents involved in their school. So what is the cause for some teens saying this? And you've shared that it's not necessarily the case for all teens, maybe just some teens. Could you talk about that in your experience as being a principal?
Totally. So for context, my school is an alternate secondary school. So in North Vancouver, we are working with the students who have struggled the most in the context of their neighborhood or mainstream school.
Right.
So we get kids that are coming in that are struggling with mental illness or substance use or kind of complex academic learner profiles. So certainly from my perspective, we're working with quite complicated kids. Okay. But even those kids along the way still value and want their parents to be involved. I think, being a parent of a daughter in grade 8 right now, I've noticed a real distinction between the level of engagement from the school to the parents at home between grade 7 and grade 8. There has been a shift. And I think naturally there is, as students age, there is naturally that desire to become more autonomous, and there's a sort of a societal need to have them kind of learn to manage themselves more and more. And so I think in some regards it's good for kids to learn how to send emails to their teachers to check in about stuff rather than parents always swooping in and solving it, or have kids address an issue with their vice principal or anybody else. At the same time, when things are tricky, I think kids still want somebody to hold the bag for them and to not feel isolated and to not feel alone. And I think that's where I think it's it's not an easy road to walk, but I think as parents, myself included, it would be important to kind of know when are things in the scope of youth skill set, and what are the things that really do need some more help. And so certainly from my end at Mountainside, where kids are coming in really complicated, it's really important that we have parents at the table. And I think the kids recognize that it's important, because some of these things, I tell kids all the time, I was like, I went to high school, I went to university, I did a master's program, and some of these things are still tricky for me. So it's not fair to expect you at 14 or 15 to know how to do this stuff. Great. So it's important, especially when things get a little tricky, to use language around, like, we need to broaden the team. So at school, often I'll say with kids, you got me, really feel like it's a more stable chair if we have 3 legs rather than 2. And so we need to bring in those parents and make sure they're at the table here. We need to bring in a youth worker or a service provider from the community. And so the more legs the more legs under the seat, the sturdier it is. So, so I think it's easy to perpetuate the idea that kids don't want parents involved, but I just don't think that it's true.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And I've also heard you say that, teens don't always mean exactly what they say.
Yeah.
And, I think...
Which is shocking.
Shocking. But I'm wondering, what would it sound like for a parent if they want to dig a little bit deeper beyond just the surface of what their kids say? Like, what does that sound like?
Like at home, having a conversation at home, and you want to... I mean, and you folks have been amazing at providing some of those conversation starters. Certainly using like the "I wonder about," or "Tell me a bit more about that," or "I heard you," just as you had just done. "I heard you said this before. What did that mean?" And I think finding ways to dig below the surface, whether it be at school or about the party on the weekend or whatever else. I think being inquisitive is important, and inquisitive without the judgment is also a pretty crucial piece, right? Because kids can sniff when you're fishing for dirt as opposed to just fishing for curiosity, right? So I think going into that conversation saying, like, what are my intentions right now? Am I trying to pull out something negative out of this, or am I genuinely just wanting to connect and learn a bit more? So.
Yeah, so it's that genuineness, right?
Yeah.
That's great. Thanks so much. The second assumption was that all teens need to graduate. So they must go to school like everyone else, or else they'll fall behind that we hear a lot about, and then not be able to graduate. So I know, Colleen, I'm just wondering if you can share what it was like for you when you assumed that as a parent. And what happened for you when you found out that there were options on how your daughter could graduate?
Yeah, so I had a daughter who had struggled with her mental health for a few years, and it was really around probably about grade 9, especially grade 10, where it became more and more difficult for her to get through her courses, for her to attend school, and I was like, I think like a lot of parents, I was the parent that was very, very anxious about it, and I can look back now and see that it was damaging my relationship with her because I just saw this end line of graduation that needed to happen by the time she was 18 years old. And boy, it's grade 10 and we're getting really, really behind on our courses. And we know grade 10, at least then, it was a very high academic year. And I just couldn't see how she was going to graduate in time. So I think it was my anxiety over it was wearing on her, probably making her more anxious. It was doing some damage to the great relationship that I had with her. And there was one thing that a school principal and counselor at the school that said to me that changed everything for me, and that was, "Mom, let go. Just let go of what happened when you went to school. Like, the system's different now. There's other options to graduation." And that changed everything. I walked out of that principal's office with feeling like, okay, there's a weight lifted here. I've been given permission to not worry about it. And that it'll happen when it happens on her own terms. And I was also reminded that her mental health challenges were in the way of her academic learning. So we needed to help her with her mental health before we could really look at the academics. So it eased up my anxiety. And it changed my relationship with my child because now there wasn't this constant conflict every day with her about her courses, about going to school. It became more about shifting my mind from thinking about her academics to teaching her how to build the relationships with her teacher, with her counselor, with her, I think it was the vice principal at the time. And it changed everything. And I've seen as she's gone on to college, we had to find an alternative path to graduation for her. It didn't look the way I thought it would look. But going on to college, I can see now that she knows how to build the relationships with the teachers and the counselors of the college. And that's it. So I feel like it gave her a life skill. And she knows that she needs to take care of her mental health first before anything else.
I hear what I think you're saying, which is that when we're anxious, or we are feeling pressured as parents. It's pretty hard to not pass that anxiety and pass that pressure onto our kids. But I think I've heard you reference before, Jeremy, that adding more pressure to a kid that's already pressurized, often not helpful.
Yep, I would agree with that, yes. And I think sometimes the tension that is created within the context of school is parents who have an expectation that might not be within the range of the kid, and so place that expectation onto the school, and so the school is caught between wanting to do well for the kid but also wanting to meet the parent expectations, and therein lies a whole kind of mess of messiness. And so allowing parents and schools to say we have a shared goal, like our goal is to get this kid to graduate, like that's what we want to do. And if we take those kind of fictitious pressures off, like on time, like by this age or in a certain way, and we allow each other to do it in a way that might not necessarily need to look like full-time or full days or whatever else, and then allow the kid to have a voice in there and say, actually, I think I'd like to have a bit more school, or I think I'd like to do it this way. I feel like my experience has been that serves everybody a lot better, and it's already stressful enough. Like there's just no point in adding stress to stress. So
I'm wondering if that whole thing about using the fall behind what? Like if we were able to, as young people, as parents, as school personnel, to go, okay, in reality, falling behind what? What does that actually mean? We can sometimes think that the things we're falling behind are catastrophic, and they're not necessarily, right?
And there is a certain amount of linear nature to school from kindergarten to grade 9. Like there is, like if you're in grade 5, for the most part, you're going to be in grade 6 next year. And then you're going to be in grade 7. And then you're going to get to high school. And then, the Ministry of Education doesn't really pay attention to those marks until grade 10. So, I mean, it's interesting. Grade 10 is a super challenging year because the nature of the relationship with school does change, where it's harder to kind of find yourself with that sort of a mercy pass, or you kind of got it enough. So we'll just kind of float you forward. And so I think recognizing that it does get more complicated, and I think also within the culture of mainstream school, just our school in general, and the parents that are at it, there is an expectation that grade 10 happens in grade 10, and grade 11 happens in grade 11, and grade 12 happens in grade 12, and then you graduate, and then we're out. And so it's hard to be outside of that realm. It's a bit like the Matrix, like once you step outside the Matrix. But at the same time, once you're outside of that hamster wheel, it's actually kind of liberating.
It is.
But you think about the world of post-secondary, it all blurs. Some people take 3 courses, some people take 4 courses, some people take a semester off, some people, and so how the K-12 industry or the K-12 system has become so locked into this idea of just annual progression. If you don't fit the annual progression mold, then there's something wrong, is like a double whammy, because sometimes things are wrong, and the system, there is flexibility within that system, right? It just it isn't always the way that parents think it's going to work.
And we may not know what there is for flexibility, or we don't know what to ask for, so we don't know how to help our kids. And I wonder how much of it too is for parents a fear of being judged by other parents, maybe, or anybody else, because it does look different. I think there was, I graduated in the 80s, and back then I think there was a stigma around something if you didn't graduate on time.
I think there's enough enough kind of blurry pathways to graduation, and it does get harder for people to kind of pull it. I think certainly school communities and the parents that are connected to them can still be reasonably insular and have a hard time seeing something outside, but there are so many other pathways to graduate and so many options that are available where people are.
So that's a good segue into the question I had, is that, I've heard you both talk about the different ways that you know of. And for you, Colleen, that you've used, and for you, Jeremy, obviously in your school, you've had to create a lot of different pathways. Parents always ask, so what are some of those things that are the options outside of what's typical? And that they're not only options in like alternative or schools like yours. What are some of those options that parents, it would be good for them to know about?
Certainly when schools would like to have most people do the most normal things, right? And I think that's, and fair enough, like when you've got, 80% of your population is going to have a pretty straight and narrow pathway to graduation. There's no point in creating alternate pathways for 100% of it. You just kind of create it for those that need it. So I think as things become more complicated for families and for students or whatever else, there are certainly flexibilities within the context of schools that work best when the parents are totally on board. Because oftentimes schools will make a suggestion around a half-day program or a day one versus a day two or whatever else, and then that elicits in parents this like, well, wait a second, that's going to put them behind, and how are they going to get all these credits? And so then schools kind of have to backpedal and say, well, we can try. There is, you can't not, classes run from September to June, and it's really hard to stray from the idea that content kind of has to get through between September and June. And if you miss a month here or a month there, it gets really hard to kind of backfill for some of those things. But certainly within the context of a mainstream school, many of our schools in North Van at least use things like a day one or a day two. They say it sounds like coming to school every day is too much. So let's take the pressure off, and instead of having 8 courses, let's do 4 courses. Okay. The trouble with that is that doesn't really work very well on let's try that for a week and then you come back to classes every day for a week and then back out. But certainly those are things that from a parent's perspective, I think heading into conversations with schools, open to amended timetables and feeling confident that everybody wants to work together and coming in with some wonderings. Like, I wonder if there's a way that we could kind of reduce the number of classes. I'm fine if they take grade 10 courses in grade 11. That's okay for me. I'm fine if we save PE for down the road. So finding ways to kind of reassure the school that I'm open to different ways of doing this. I just want to keep my kid moving forward. Certainly a burgeoning industry or burgeoning kind of way of offering school is through online or distributed learning that works really well for kids and families who want more flexibility in their day, that maybe they're a kid who their prime learning time was between 9 o'clock at night and midnight, which is hard to do when you're in a bricks and mortar school, but online, some kids really like that self-paced nature of stuff. Other kids, it's totally not a fit for, because it has no social element, and it's very much around reading content online and producing content and that. So I think kind of going into it knowing that for when things get complicated, there'll be things that will work and there's things that won't work. Like, we've worked really hard to try and shake this stigma about alternate programs in North Vancouver, and I think we've done a really good job of it. But I know that that's a struggle for lots of other places, that the kind of the perpetuated stereotype of what it looks like in that school is most often carried by those that have no idea what goes on in that school, and parents that have never had to walk with a tricky kid, right? So I think finding ways to approach that with an open mind and saying, like, actually, I'm okay with that. Like, I'm open to it. I think would be helpful for schools to know as well, because sometimes I think that they're fighting that my kid's not going to an alternate school, and my kid's going to stay in this one, and they're going to do all these things. And so kind of coming into it with some openness would be important. It
comes back to Colleen's earlier point about stigma.
Yeah.
And how it can be very stigmatizing for parents when you're, you run into other parents and stuff. Oh, where's so-and-so? I haven't, how's he doing in school? I've heard that he's not going to our school anymore. And it's like, oh, yeah, he's going to an alternative school. And it's like, oh. So there's some of that happens, right? Yeah.
Well, just in terms of that, we rebranded ourselves as Mountainside Secondary, not Mountainside Alternate Secondary. So I think that there's things that school districts could be doing as well to try and change the way that school is perceived, even in terms of how it's named, how it's housed, where it lives, all those things. I think it's important that those schools are seen as really important mechanisms by which we improve our grad rates. I think about, school districts are always judged on their graduation rates. Well, if you want to improve your graduation rates, get the kids that aren't graduating to graduate.
You mentioned something when we were preparing for this around standing granted.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that's what it was called. I only knew that was what they did for my son. And so I'm wondering if you could just talk about what is standing granted.
Yeah, we talked about it, and I went, did I get that right? I better go check up on that. Because, but standing granted, and again, I say this cautiously, because the mechanism by which schools will use standing granted is really up to the school and the school district. So I can certainly speak to how I might use it in my school, but the mechanisms that exist in Fort St. John or Victoria or wherever else you are might be very different than what exists in ours. But the concept of standing granted is that a student has met a number of the curricular elements of that course, but have not met all of them. But the ones that they have met have been met in a way that based on a criteria developed at the school level or at the district level, a grade of standing granting can be given, which basically gives that kid the credit for that course and says you've met enough of the learning outcomes to give you credit for this course, but it doesn't give them a mark. So the mark wouldn't, so that course wouldn't be eligible for university entrance, or it wouldn't be, you couldn't use that as one of your 4 academic courses to get into SFU or UBC or anything else, but it gets you the credit. So as an example, in my school, let's say a student is really struggling. You got PE 10 is a mandatory. You have to have PE 10. A lot of our kids don't like PE 10. So we offer different versions of PE 10. We call it wellness. And oftentimes we'll have kids document what they're doing at home to keep track of their own physical wellness and health and stuff like that. And then we'll bring that in and say, you know what, we're going to give you credit for that course. We're not going to give you a mark for it.
Nice.
But we're going to say you've met the criteria based on what we've determined here in the school. And the teachers would document it and all that stuff. So I think it's, my caution is not, here's a new ticket, go in there and be like, bam, I want my kid to get standing granted for this course. But you might inquire about, hey, tell me, I've heard about this thing called standing granted where you're able to give kids credit without the mark. What might be some credit? I'm curious about what the criteria is in this school around standing granted.
Sure, alleviate a lot of the pressure, wouldn't it?
Yeah, totally.
Right.
Yeah.
And you gave some great language there about how we can ask for things as parents.
Totally.
Because we don't always have the language, and we've been, for many families, fighting for so long to try and figure out what can we do. Yeah. It's hard, and sometimes you don't show up at your best, and it's not because you can't, it just means that in that moment, it's just been really hard for a long time.
Yeah. Finding ways to kind of land this as inviting somebody into a problem solving as opposed to I demand
making assumptions.
This, because it just becomes so polarizing and people dig into their positions and people don't like that. Nobody feels good about that. So I think at the root, I trust that my colleagues who are in administration and working in schools actually really do want to see people graduate. They do want to see them move forward, and sometimes they just don't. They don't know how, or they forget about the flexibilities that they have access to, or they're worried about what you're thinking, and and all that stuff. So I think coming into it with that, an openness and a wonder and a feeling of like, I'm the parent, it's my kid, I've got this. Like we're going to be okay here.
And also as a parent, being patient with the school, because sometimes the answer isn't really obvious.
Dr. Ross Green talks about, he's got this philosophy called kids do well if they can, right? And I often with my teachers apply that to really people do well if they can. People are doing the best they can, and sometimes they forget that. But if you kind of go into it saying that usually people want to do right by other people, and if you kind of go into it with that trust and that philosophy, then most times you'll walk out of that feeling as though that was true, right? But sometimes when you come in swinging, it can be a little tough, and that's for schools as well. Like if schools come in swinging, then
right. That leads to our third assumption, which is that teens are just choosing to not work hard at getting to school and doing well in school, and you just brought up Ross Green. So. Would you say that this is true or not? That isn't it true that almost all teens want to do well and be liked and accepted by their parents and peers?
That is what I choose to believe. Yes. Philosophically, that helps me approach the work that I do, just to trust that folks are doing the best that they can. No, I think that there are times where kids cut a few corners here or there, and kids certainly developmentally are made to be oppositional at times, and they're supposed to be challenging authority, and they're supposed to be doing all that stuff, and school is too early and all that stuff. So certainly there are times where it's maybe a question of motivation more than ability, but that doesn't mean that, I think at the root they do want to be motivated to go to school. Like they understand when things aren't going how they're supposed to.
When I think about what kind of books there are out there, and what people that have spoken about some of that is Dr. Ross Green and that whole collaborative problem solving. I've got 3 parts to this question. So, I think that people don't necessarily understand what does collaborative problem solving, what is that? How do you use it at school with your students? And what are a couple of things about it that you think parents could use at home that maybe you even use with your kids at home?
when I'm at my best.
And that's the thing, when we're at our best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there are times that I'm not functioning on all cylinders either. So I cut myself some slack. I think the easiest way to look at it is that, and I'll summarize. So he approaches that there's kind of three ways to solve a problem. One is that adults win. So adults impose will on kids, and they get what they want. So he calls that kind of A, the A solution. There's the C solution, which is that children win. You just say, you know what, I'm done. It's over to you. You're going to do what you want, and I'm not going to do this anymore, right? And then his ultimate plan is called Plan B, which is B for both. So both adults and kids, or both adults and whatever it is, that people who are trying to solve a problem, that we find a way that everybody walks away feeling as though they got their needs met, and it does tie back into needs. The concept works best when you almost picture yourself. You take the problem, which is usually between you and I, and we're going to go to loggerheads over this problem, and we're going to put the problem over here, and we're going to turn our chairs around and say, how can we work together to solve this problem? So I have this huge whiteboard in my office, and I put it up on the board, and I say, this is what I hear you saying. You really need to have more autonomy, or you really feel as though you're not being heard by your teacher. And what I'm saying is it's really disruptive and it's too loud in the classroom. So what we need to find is a way that we can have the classroom feel a bit more quiet and you feel a bit more heard by your teacher. Let's figure this out. And so what you end up with is a solution that looks like, well, if I had 3 minutes of your time at the start of class, that might be more helpful. Oh, okay, well, let's follow that one through a little bit more here. So the plan would be that you get 3 minutes or 2 minutes with your teacher at the start, get you grounded, and the theory would be that will help kind of sustain you for the class. Okay, let's try that for a week. Let's come back to that. So the mechanism ends up being far less about adults imposing will and saying, this is the code of conduct, these are the rules, and thou shalt do them, which is, this is how we hope to treat each other here, and it's not working super well. So how do let's bring this back to a conversation and see if there's another way that everybody can kind of feel like they're getting at least a portion of what they need, as opposed to the A and the C. Now, what I like most about his stuff is that Plan C is sometimes Plan C for now. Like, I'm not going to do this one right now because I'm in the grocery store and I'm just going to find some way to sail through this one and get out of this as unscathed as possible. But we're coming back to this. We're going to talk. So I do that with kids all the time. It's sort of being intentional around, I'm going to leave it for now and come back. So I think its impact at school has been that you're doing a couple of things. You're solving a problem in a peaceful way that's maintaining relationship and saying, this is important enough for me to figure out with you together, as opposed to me just telling you what I want you to do. It's also totally training that frontal lobe, like you are the surrogate frontal lobe, and you're helping basically all those things that we do in our head as adults sometimes. Sometimes kids just developmentally don't learn those skills. And so it really is coaching them through that problem-solving process. And what I find over time is that they begin to do that stuff for themselves. But I can see the impact at home and with families for sure.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that. If picturing what that's like at home is if you talked about a whiteboard. Well, as a parent, I'm going to put here, Plan A is this. You're just going to go to school. That's my plan. Your plan is what? You're not going to school.
I'm not going.
Okay.
I'm
So
staying in
now
bed.
we
One
need
of
to
us is going
figure
to
out.
win and one of us is going to lose.
So let's go to Plan B.
Yeah.
And so I think that's an interesting way for us to look at putting the problem outside and knowing that each person has a position and that we need to get somewhere in the middle on what's important about what you both want, right? That whole Plan B idea is.
Certainly about timing. Like the timing of it is really important.
Yeah.
We're going to come back to it and talk about it later, but for now, this is not up for discussion. This is a non-negotiable and it needs to end. So I think certainly judiciously knowing that there are times where adults have to kind of step up and be like, I have to be able to be in charge with my kids, at home and my kids at school too.
Yes.
So would you say that actually is a pretty good resource for parents, that collaborative problem solving?
Yeah, the ones that the parents that I've engaged with, the reading the book or engaging with his material online has been really helpful in terms of reframing what otherwise looks like a rather conflictual relationship.
Okay. Yeah,
and maintaining relationship is really important. So
our fourth assumption is the one that if those parents would just, and if those teachers would just, we can often assume things would just be better if people would just do what they're supposed to do. I know I've felt it as a parent. I'm sure that teachers have felt that about me. And so just wondering if we could talk a little bit about that, because Colleen, you know, when you thought that the school personnel, you know, should just do what they were supposed to do to help your daughter graduate, and your daughter should just do what she needed to do to graduate. Why can't you just do it? When we get in that place of looking at what others need to do or what others need to be, how do you show up when you're thinking like that as a parent?
Not good. It's really not good. And it comes to blaming. It comes to blaming the school personnel or blaming the system. And I think it's frustration. Sometimes I remember feeling I'm not being heard. Well, it wasn't that I wasn't being heard, it's that I didn't know what to ask for. I knew what I thought my kid needed, but you know, she had a different idea, which is fine. So it was that letting go. But it's the blaming, and you don't show up well. It's the stress that we carry with us, and going into any kind of interaction with any of the school staff, with that heaviness on our shoulders. It's our body language, it's our tone of voice, it's the words that we choose to communicate, and it's really hard sometimes to get rid of that. But I think it's also super important if we can. I used to have to tell myself, don't just rush into the school. Like, don't just rush into a meeting thinking, you know, pick up the phone, I need a meeting. I need time to calm down. I need maybe somebody else that I need to vent to, so that I can get to a place where I can assume good intentions of the school and where I can remember that they do want things to go well. And to also find a way to reframe what it is that my child needs and that I need from the school. So yeah, it is very hard to do sometimes, especially when things aren't going well with our children. But it's trying to figure out what it is that I need so that I can show up better.
I think from a school's end, like, the benefit that we have is that they're not my children.
Yes, good point.
So I think for me in my role, like, I certainly get very complicated parents coming in with, especially at the start where they're not used to what we're offering and they're taking that step out of the behind culture and the like have to keep going culture and that.
Yes.
So I think for a school, I think, you know, leading with empathy and compassion is really important, and recognize, like, it's complicated for us for 5 hours during the day, but it's not my blood. This is not my, so I have a role. Like, my role is to support families that are struggling. I think always, leading with empathy, and also making sure that you are communicating your good intentions, which is at the root of whatever we're doing here. I'm trying to make things better. Like, that's all I want to. Like, I want your kid to be feeling okay about themselves, and I want you to have home feel good. And I think it's important I think the more you can communicate that as schools, saying, like, I'm not trying to do anybody wrong, and I hear you, and it must be so hard, I think really helps to soften that conversation, so that people kind of trust that you're in it for the right reasons and not trying to do.
And see, as a parent, that would go a long ways. The acknowledgement from the school about how hard it is.
Yeah.
I think right then I'm going to start showing up better, because it's been acknowledged that it is hard, because it is really hard.
So do you? One of the things that I think about is that sometimes having people know how hard it is for you, and the things that are the reason behind you being either afraid or angry or sad, is that it makes you very vulnerable.
Yes.
And so I wonder around that piece of how does it feel, Jeremy, if parents tell you, this is why I'm showing up like this.
Yeah.
I mean,
Would it help for you to know?
Well, that's
why?
no different than just humans in general. That I think it does help when people kind of own their own stuff, own your limitations, own what's going well, own what isn't going well, and be able to say, like, I know I'm coming at this, I'm just feeling protective, I'm just feeling like I want what's right for my kid, or whatever else. And then schools go like, well, that's that's what we want to. And then
Yeah.
then all of a sudden, like, I think those moments of vulnerability and humility and just honest presentation of self, I think, and again, I can't speak for every single principal in the entire province, right? But I think from my perspective, that would go a long way. And as would it go a long way for me to come into a meeting and say, you know what, I'm not having a great day either. Like, I'm sorry, I totally lost it. I
Yes.
wasn't helpful
Yeah.
last time. You know, all that stuff. I just think, trying to bring honest and authentic
Yeah.
'Cause
selves
we
to
can always try
conversations
again. We can always try
Totally,
again, right?
yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point about parents, because sometimes there is an urgent matter, and as a parent, you might be frustrated, you're overwhelmed, you have lack of sleep, everything that you're dealing with your child, and you can't show up well, but there's an urgent matter that needs to be addressed. So how do you just wait it out? You can't. So I love that idea of just communicating to the school, to the principal, whoever it is that you're interacting with. This is what's going on for me, and I'm sorry I'm showing up like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
that's
just
important.
wonder what kind of shift would that create, really,
Yeah.
in everybody? You know, even as when we think about how we are as parents and trying to talk to our teens about stuff that really is important to us, but do the teens necessarily understand why it's so important to me? I am afraid.
Yes.
I'm afraid, and I don't know how to not be afraid. And I think when we can say some of that to each other, it
Yeah, I think you're right.
starts a conversation differently. And I just, that's something that we try to think about as far as Family Smart
Yeah.
practices, and creating spaces where it's safe. So it's safe for me to say that to you as a principal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're not going to judge me for it, or you're not going to think, but it's just like, I just need you to know that I am especially vulnerable today, or I'm especially tired, and I just don't know what else to do right now. It just feels like it would go differently between adults in our schools and our homes, and
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
because I've heard you say that schools are not just for kids. So what do you say to teachers
To teachers who are
that are
frustrated
just
with
frustrated with parents?
I mean, we're perpetually trying to find other ways to couch some language. So certainly as an administrator, I will come in and try to soften some language and then kind of send ourselves back in there when things are better. I think, with our staff, reminding them that people are humans and that when things are hard, people don't operate at their best, and that. So we have worked really hard to make sure that our teachers are working closely with our families. If you come into it saying, I care about your kid,
Yes.
I like your kid,
Yeah.
I want to do well. You like your
Yeah.
kid? You want to do well?
Yeah.
Oh, we're on the same page then.
Yeah.
Let's figure this thing
Yeah.
out.
I think that's just a fabulous way to kind of close out this conversation, by that, all those kind of assumptions and how those assumptions can play out. But really, at the end of the day, it's like saying, I care about your kid, and you care about your kid.
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
know that's easier to do when people are in a good place, but it's even more important, I would think, to do it when people are challenged. And
Yeah.
maybe that has to be the thing that we open with, even when it's at the hardest times, is
Yeah.
just to say, I care, you care.
And yeah.
Can we just go from there?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
maybe that's a way forward for the adults in our homes and our schools
Like that. Yeah.
to start from, so that we can actually help these teens make it through school, and
Yeah.
however it's going to look for them.
Yeah. So that we're working together. We're not blaming each other and
Yeah.
expecting each other to do certain things.
And
coming
forgetting all
alongside
about
each
that
other.
there's options.
Yes.
And that,
Yeah. Yeah.
just going from that place. So I just want to thank you
That's
both.
wise.
For the people that are watching this, we hope that this is helpful to you. There's no one answer to how we get our teens through school. And there's no one person. And I think that's what I've heard, is that it's really about building a team around our teens, so that we can help them make good choices and make them aware of other options. And when those options are, when we know better, we can do better. and I think in the end it probably helps our kids. So just fabulous having you
Great.
both.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you,
Yep.
Kelly.
And yeah, and we want to encourage you to please fill out our feedback form. These sessions are really driven by what families tell us they would like to know more about, and we're hearing more and more from professionals about, I really would like to hear this, I'd like to hear the perspective of someone in my profession and a family. So we're trying to make these sessions useful, and we've heard that people are using them in lunch and learns, and parents are watching them at home. So please give us your feedback. If this works for you, then we'll do more of these, and it helps us be able to get the funding so that you can have these for free. We look forward to seeing you at our next In the Know. So thank you.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.